Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you all can see, I have with me Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, who is a renowned voice as far as China is concerned. I'm going to actually try and understand from him what is China really wanting from India going forward. Both the countries seem to be at a crossroad where one or the other decision will have to be taken for the future. Sir, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking out the time. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on my channel once again.
Thank you, Aadi, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be on the platform that you provide.
Thank you, sir. Sir, how do you gauge the recent narrative of the Chinese where they are wanting to keep aside the border dispute between both the countries and basically move on as business as usual?
I would, to give you a short answer, I would have been surprised had they done anything else, because what they have done is, or rather, they have done what they want to do, and now they're telling us, accept it and let's move on. In a nutshell, and we are obviously not willing to do that. Our position is that by coming where you have in April 2020, you have upset the equilibrium that existed, and you have violated the various understandings and agreements that have been reached. So there is no question of going back unless you, pull back or restore the position, restore the status quo, as we say. But more importantly, I think for us, we need to carry out a fresh evaluation of our own policy towards China in view of what has happened and what China has done. Because let's not forget that there were two meetings at the highest level in Wuhan and in Mamallapuram before this incident occurred, before they did what they did. So my own view is that it was a strategic and deliberate move by Xi Jinping as to what happened. Second point is that, in my mind, at least, there's no doubt that it is Xi Jinping who calls the shots, and the others are people who carry out his instructions. At the most, maybe in an inner circle, there may be some discussion, but the path forward has already been decided. And at the 20th Party Congress in October, if you recall, there was a clip of the Galwan clashes shown on the opening day, when there would have been at least 5,000 people present, all the senior leaders, etc., the senior officials. So the message was quite clear, because the Congress normally focuses on internal issues. So by putting this out there, they've said that this is how we view India, this is what is happening on the border. So that's something we need to keep in mind. The third thing is, there have been no steps by the Chinese to indicate that they really want to make up and move on. Mind you, I'm saying make up and move on. So on the UN sanctions against terrorists, which we have proposed, there have been technical holds put. On other issues, there have been blocks put. Their relationship with the Pakistanis, of course, continues. I mean, there is no reason for us to feel that there is a positive step forward. They are still critical of us and trying to pressure us as far as Huawei's exclusion from G5 is concerned. So there are a series of issues. So when they say normalization, obviously, why do they want to normalize? The simple answer is because of our market. And they anticipate being edged out of the American and European markets in course of time. So ours is the next largest market, which is untapped, where they want to come in. I think that's it, because for them, they're still export driven, and that is important. So that is how I look at the picture. You did mention, there have been a couple of, I would say, stray voices or isolated voices who have, for example, as you said, one person said there are low-level people dealing with the India policy. I don't think so. There may be low-level people sitting wherever they do, but I'd like to know from him which setup, because the organization that has the largest voice on the border issue is the PLA, and the second would be the Ministry of Commerce. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has actually negligible voice or play on border matters. And Xi Jinping sits at the top. He's not only the president of China, he's the chairman of the military commission, and he heads the leading central small leading group on foreign affairs. So he is in total charge actually, and he will be keeping track of it quite minutely.
When you say that, sir, and when we hear Xi Jinping himself saying not 1 inch in terms of border and in terms of any land loss or any territorial loss is what he recently mentioned. How do you take that into context of India? Is that basically pointed towards this area, or is there any other areas as well? Because as far as the land issue is concerned, I think the biggest one is with India, sir.
You're right. The land issue is the biggest one with India, but he has not spoken only of the land issue in the context of conceding ground. His the phrase and the sentence that he uses is a more omnibus kind of sentence, which is mainly against the United States. He's talking about Taiwan being part of China, where he says we are not going to yield ground. That's one. Now, if you look at his recent statements when he went to Mongolia, Inner Mongolia as they call it, there, yes, he made a number of references to border defense, etc. Let's not forget, he's also spent time there. There were three other party secretaries who came there, so it was an important visit. Also, because they have started trying to recruit Mongols for service in Tibet because they were not getting enough people. And that has created resentment in Mongolia. People are saying you've got more Hans than Mongols, you take them. So, all that kind of stuff. But there, yes, the references to border, you can say, is references to us. But there will be no yielding of ground. He's made that clear. And I think the PLA also, at various forums, they're also sticking to that same formulation.
When you look at the geopolitics today, sir, which is the larger global game playing out in the world, and especially when you look at the financial sector, one would really think that the Chinese would say, yeah, India is a big emerging market, emerging economy. Let's have them on our side so that we can counter the so-called dollar domination. Uh, how do you think that plays into this whole India-China principle, sir?
I think, I can't produce any evidence right now, but I think by doing what they did in April 2020, Xi Jinping made a strategic miscalculation. It was a mistake. Because, as you rightly pointed out, when you're playing the big game, you want to keep your periphery intact and calm. He has not done that. He has annoyed us. He has uh, dissipated whatever little trust existed between India and China. There's none now. So, and not only that, they keep saying you're becoming closer to the United States. Actually, they're pushing us there in that direction, if you look at it from one point of view. So, I think it was a miscalculation. The second thing I would like to mention is that they probably didn't expect that we would stand our ground and hold firm, which we have done. So today we have 70,000 troops on our side, 70 odd thousand on their side, facing each other. But they should have got an inkling after what happened at Doklam. Apparently they didn't. So there is a resolve here also, which I think they will have to factor in now. And there will have to be some moves by them. If they really want to start, shall I say, repairing the relationship. But it's going to take a long time. I don't think the strategists in India, uh, ordinary people in India, guys like you and me in India, that we are going to forget what happened. And we are going to keep pointing to that every time there is an effort to rebuild and develop the relationship.
A huge amount of political capital would be needed for something
Yeah.
like that, sir. Sir, when you spoke about the US and the upcoming visit of Prime Minister Modi to US is actually nobody's talking the China angle about it. And once we see the relationship between India and US strengthening up from 2006 2008, the nuclear deal onwards, we've had an aggressive China on our border. Uh, of course, there were incidents before, but post 2008, you see the spike going up. The numbers of standoffs increase and things like that. How do you see this particular visit which is supposed to be pretty much a mark in terms of India-US defense relationship vis-a-vis China, sir.
Well, I would make a slight differentiation there, Adi. Firstly,
Sir.
I think US-India is another relationship. It's not necessarily, China-related relationship. Of course, China's aggression has come into play now. It will be a factor. It will come up in discussions, and it is there in the backdrop on the American side and on the Indian side. But as far as we are concerned, I think we are looking at a long-term relationship with the United States. We are on, trying to build our economy. We are trying to move up and modernize ourselves. We are trying to make our country prosperous. And for that, you do need capital, you do need technology, and only the United States can provide that. There's no other country really which can give that quality of technology or the capital required. So it is in our interest to be friendly with them. They have their own interest. They will also need a market. They will also need production centers. They will also need a buffer against a growing China. So there are different interests on both sides. But I think the common interest is that we have a lot of things going for each other. We have a large diaspora there. We understand each other. We have a lot of common interests. And the bottom line for anyone who wants to say, well, what about China? That's in Asia. I'll say, well, the fact is that the United States doesn't have a common border with us. The Chinese do, and the border is unsettled.
Well, sir, that's I think that's the most important thing that I think a lot of people forget in terms of the relationship and the trilateral, if I may, in a loose sense, actually put it across the three big players in this. So since 1960s, 50s, 60s, the Chinese have always pointed out to India the two-front threat that they can create towards us. As a matter of fact, a letter written to the Indian ambassador on the 16th of September in 1959 clearly states, then the last line of the letter states that uh, you can be in a two-front threat and you can also provide that for us. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the last line read that, here is a place where mutually we meet. So this is something that was enunciated in 1959 by the Chinese. Do you think they are today revisiting that policy, considering the factor that they have a front open, hot front almost in Taiwan, and they've got another one with India? Is this something which is in their strategic calculation, a two-front threat towards themselves?
Well, certainly it pays for them to keep it open and keep reminding us that there is this possibility that exists. They did remind us in no uncertain terms during Doklam too that we can always create another front. So that is there. But I think I look at it this way that the Chinese power has actually already flowed through the Western Theatre Command, the way the Western Theatre Command has been set up. It has already flowed into Pakistan. They have got colonels posted in each other's, what we would call army headquarters and their joint staff department. I don't know what these colonels are doing, but they're senior officers, senior colonels. And how many more people there are, I don't know. And whether more have come in or more senior people have come in, I'm not aware. But apart from this, which indicates close confabulation at the planning levels, they have supplied a lot of equipment and arms and training to Pakistani personnel, armed forces personnel. So there already exists some synergy, if I may call it that, between the two. Whether they will act in concert is another question, because the Pakistanis would also be conscious that if something happens and China and Pakistan are to act in concert against us, then we would also think of whom to tackle first. And if we decide to tackle Pakistan, that means we bring all our might against them. It will be bad news for them. I mean, we'll really go for them and then turn our attention to the Chinese. I'm just speculating, but I guess that's one way of doing it. So I think they would think uh, long and hard unless they find that the Chinese have opened the front, they are making a lot of headway. Then, of course, when the man is down, they will come. They'll open their front.
That's a very opportunistic way of looking at things, sir. Just keep things
I think
going
so.
the way it is.
I think so. They always have the other, shall I say, non-conventional method, which is using their terrorists against us, which they've been doing. Then, the intensity has come down quite a bit, but that can, they will try and ramp it up again, and that way try and assist the Chinese.
So, although there is no certain proof of things like this, but the incidents in Manipur, a lot of people have pointed fingers that there has to be some sort of a foreign hand, and the Chinese are quite famous for finding these vulnerabilities within countries. As we go close towards a very important election year, considering that there's elections in the U.S. and India, as a matter of fact, that's quite a dangerous time for democratic setups, if I may. How do you see their influence and their influence operations playing into these kind of fault lines, sir? I'm sure with a little bit of a spark in Manipur, they would have put a little bit of oil into it. Okay, something is there. Let's take some advantage. How do you see this, and what are the steps that we should look for before we, get into this particular season, sir?
Well, as you said, we are going to speculate a bit here because there's no hard evidence pointing to their involvement, except their consistent contact with Northeast insurgents, and they're having supplied arms and ammunition to them. And the supply and the contacts take place in Kunming, maybe other places, but in Kunming is the place where they've been going. So there may be more, I do not know. But knowing the way the Chinese operate, I wouldn't at all be surprised if, with trouble brewing, they adding fuel to the fire, if I may put it. That is very, very possible. And I think it's something they could do. But I still would look at it largely as a problem that we have to solve because, for them also to play too open a role would queer the pitch in other areas. So I think they'd be careful of that. Um, they're fond of saying that, after Deng Xiaoping took over, we haven't been doing it. But facts, I think, prove otherwise.
Old habits die hard, sir.
Old habits.
That's something. And who can forget, really, the gun market of East Asia? So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's yes, sir. So the political. I want to talk about a little bit of not domestic politics, but political will, which would be required to sort out the China issue, would be huge, because the lack of trust between both the countries, uh, and it's probably likewise for Xi Jinping as well, but in a very closed quarter. There would be a lot of pressure. I mean, we were aware that after the 2020 standoff, when he went to the Bedahir meeting, he wasn't given a very warm reception because of what happened with India. How do you see the politics between these two leaders playing out going forward, considering they're supposed to meet in India on the G20 till now, at least that is what is in the game, and right up till and forward after that? Do you see any sort of personal interaction, because that's the only place where there's a gap in terms of sorting out this issue?
Well, so far the Chinese have not shown any desire. You remember at the last meeting when they came face to face, Modi was polite enough and courteous enough to wish him and stretch out his hand, but Xi Jinping sort of was very cursory and moved off. So there was no exchange of any pleasantries or there was no discussion. SCO meeting, I think, was virtual, so that put paid to that. Now, we don't know about what's going to happen here, whether he comes or not, but it's an international setting, and, I think he's been invited. Whether he comes or not, I have no information. But I think we have two strong leaders, uh, him and Prime Minister Modi. Both have today, both have the political clout to take tough and hard decisions. But I think both also are hemmed in by the fact that on territorial issues, compromise will not be possible. Uh, so, I mean, it will be the national mood as well, which will prevent it. So, I think to that extent, they'll have to negotiate their way, and provided there is a willingness. Now, one can say that, well, both of them are, stuck to their positions and they're not going to give. Fine, that's one way. But I also look at it this from this point of view, that how long can the Chinese just stay on there? They're not used to staying in these heights. And 70,000 of them, they've raised their salaries, I think, on two occasions so far. The troops are unhappy to stick on longer, so they are being rotated not rotated, they go home after 1.5 years or 2 years. So, whereas in our case, it's different. So, what happens, I don't know what is going to happen. But from our side, I know the effort is certainly to try and, cool it down and resolve it peacefully, whatever is happening, try and get a disengagement, because no one wants really the economic agenda to be hurt. So I think that is our position. The Chinese position, I think there is a bit of overconfidence. They feel that they are strong enough to take care of things. They also feel overconfident, I would put it, to deal with us. But I always feel that they've never been tested after '79, which was a poor performance on their part. And I don't think the Indian Army is, I mean, whatever we might say about them not being very well equipped, etc. They certainly are battle hardened and they're certainly trained. And I think it'll be pretty tough. It's not going to be a Psy-war effort. It's not going to be just propaganda videos which are being put out.
Hmm. Do you think the Chinese today are compartmentalizing us with the US in terms of their outlook towards uh, this particular combination? Is it like a hyphenated relationship between both the countries? As from the Chinese perspective, we know the reality, but is it that what the Chinese see, that okay, these two guys are not announcing it, but they're like allies?
I think it's convenient for the Chinese to say that India and US are close together, etc. India, I mean, the reality is that they have far more contacts with the Americans on a daily basis than we do. They have far more points of contact, far more points of actual substantive interaction than we do. So they are aware of that. And I mean, even when things are going very, very south, they are still meeting at the highest levels. I mean, you've got Blinken going down there and, phone calls happening, etc. So they know that. But it suits them to say that, India and US are coming closer, and in parentheses, they're ganging up against us, along with the other partners. So India, in other words, and if I may take you back to the language they used to use in the late 50s and 60s, India is becoming a lackey of the United States. That's the kind of messaging that they would like to do, which of course is far from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I foresee, especially after this particular visit, that their messaging is going to change. And probably we'll be seeing a little more aggressive messaging in terms of linking India with the US and with the US sort of hegemony, or whatever you may want to term it
Yeah.
as. So my last question to you is in terms of economics. We also see that the Chinese uh, factory outputs are down, their unemployment ratios are high. So there's a lot of internal turmoil, and as a matter of fact, there are reports of protests in front of banks, and a whole lot of little spurts which weren't there before. And a lot many people would attribute that to decoupling, or as the Western powers like to call it, de-risking. Uh, Whatever you may say, there's a detachment, and then you find India taking over some of that business. So there has to be a certain amount of understanding within the CCP that okay, here is someone who's also now posing a economic, not really a threat, but a challenge. How do you see them looking at India as a growing economic power, sir?
They think it's going to take a long time for us to come anywhere near being a real challenge. At the same time, their own economy is in bad shape. I mean, as you rightly pointed out. And for various reasons, they're also monitoring it closely. We are not getting the kind of FDIs, etc., that even we hope for, but I think we are improving on that score. And I'm talking about investment in terms of technology, factories, etc. But so the Chinese know that we have a way to go before we really this thing. What worries them is that if the United States start giving us a lot of preferential treatment and starts, assisting, shall I say, or facilitating their companies to come in here, that could be a problem. But I think in their inner sanctums, they still feel that they are way ahead, they're comfortably ahead, and they don't really see us as a challenge in that sense, except again for their propaganda purposes and for their own domestic audience to keep the nationalism up. Like on population, after India was our population overtook the Chinese, they suddenly became conscious of it, began talking about it, but they also began saying that it's quality that matters and not the numbers. So there is that element. They don't like to be second in any case. But they look at Vietnam sort of capturing a lot of the market. They look at Sri Lanka. They're not very worried because those are small countries and they have limited capacity. But India, if it gets its act together, if we really start getting those guys in, the companies, etc., then it will be a real challenge for the Chinese. And I think we are moving in that direction.
That to me is a certain amount of an issue, because when you, and we've just started doing this, as a matter of fact. So these
Yeah,
are manufacturing hubs, take time. It's not overnight. So as this
exactly.
thing opens out, I don't know why. I really feel that the economic tensions would be at the forefront as much as the military tensions are there going forward, sir.
No,
It's
certainly.
a it's a very funny scenario that I find, and I'll take a last 30-second comment from you, sir. Do you think Chinese? You mentioned that they made a strategic mistake. Do you think that Chinese today realize that they made a strategic mistake and are being reactive to that mistake, or they, in their mind, are still being proactive in terms of keeping India at its place?
No, they are definitely keeping India at not bay, trying to keep India, or shall I say, trying to put India in its place and keep it there. That is the phrasing I think I would go with. But whether they realize that it was a strategic mistake or not, even if some of them do, how many of them are going to be able to tell Xi Jinping that you erred? And with him becoming stronger and stronger, I think that's the question. So we'll have to wait and see whether he decides that things are getting too uncomfortable, and if they are getting very uncomfortable for him internally and from the US, then he might consider a change. But otherwise, I don't see. And their mindset, from what I can see in their media, etc., is more and more of that they're under threat from the hostile foreign powers, as they put it, quote unquote. They're worried about internal dissension. They're worried about social tensions being triggered from outside by the Americans,
Hmm.
to be specific, and color revolutions. So, in that kind of a mindset, when you feel you're under siege, it's difficult for them to make any kind of concessionary move towards a country like India, particularly when Xi Jinping has built up so much nationalism there, which also helps to keep him in the saddle and in the public image as a strong man.
Politics and personal egos at the end of it. I think that's the important word for Xi Jinping. Sir, thank you so much. This was quite an interesting and very, very enlightening session, because we've touched upon certain things that are normally not written or spoken about, and I'm glad that I was able to clarify a certain amount of doubts that I had with regards to Chinese thought processes, and that's something I guess India needs a lot more of understanding, in that particular field. And it's people like you who've given us an insight. I'm grateful and thank you for joining me for this session, and looking forward for a fruitful interaction next time as well, sir. Till then,
Thank you very
bye.
much, Adi. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you again.
Thank you, sir.